Hi guys, it's Victoria and welcome back to Femhead. Today I want to talk about our cycles returning after giving birth, some things you can look for, my experience, and all of that. I got my first period after having Theo when I was 10 weeks postpartum. I finished up my postpartum bleeding around 6 weeks. So this was much earlier than I expected. From what I had gathered and understood, I wouldn't get my period for several months because at the time I was exclusively breastfeeding him. At this point I wasn't even charting, like trying to get a basal body temperature in the morning was impossible with a newborn, and I just really wasn't even thinking of my cervical fluid because I'll get into it, but I just had very fertile quality egg white stringy fluid, and I still do. My period just showed up and I thought, oh, okay, cool, I guess. There are plenty of new moms that don't get their first period until like 8, 9, 10 months postpartum, but I got mine at 2. But part of me was oddly happy to have it back so soon. I didn't have to continue to be stuck in this weird limbo of knowing that I'm fertile but not having a cycle to chart because my hormones were still out of whack. I could just get on with it, have my cycle, and get back to my new normal. But like I said, today I want to talk about your cycle returning after giving birth, what to look for, what to expect, a few of those things. I've only given birth one time. This is my experience, what I just shared. First off, I have to just start this video by saying, even though breastfeeding can delay ovulation and your cycle coming back, it is not a foolproof method of birth control. I don't want you to think, well, I'm breastfeeding, therefore I'm not fertile and I can't get pregnant, because you can, and it actually happens quite often. But I just want you to understand that just like with FAM, there are rules and guidelines to the lactational amenorrhea method. You can't just go, oh, I'm breastfeeding, I'm safe. So if this is what you want to use as birth control, make sure that you learn about it correctly and thoroughly and that you're practicing it correctly. And even though you can have an anovulatory cycle and get your period, most likely you're going to ovulate and then have your period. So if you're just waiting for your first period to show up and then to worry about it, you can technically get pregnant before ever having a period again. And like I said, there are plenty of women that this happens to. There's a term, Irish twins. So let's talk about breastfeeding. If you don't breastfeed, that is a-okay. I was able to exclusively breastfeed Theo for the first like 3.5 months of his life. And then if you saw my 4-month update video, which I'll link down below, things went a little haywire because he got sick, and then I had to start exclusively pumping, fortifying my milk, and bottle feeding him to make sure he was getting enough calories in because he was just low on the weight scale. I think messed up my milk production. So I've experienced both camps of exclusively breastfeeding, pumping and bottle feeding, feeding formula. But breastfeeding is what's going to send the signals to your body to delay production of certain hormones that are going to bring your cycle back. If you bottle feed or formula feed, you can expect it to come back a lot sooner. So if you are exclusively breastfeeding or nearly exclusively breastfeeding, this means that your baby is feeding or suckling at the breast every 4 hours during the day and at least every 6 at night. This also means you're limiting pacifiers, drinking from bottles, sippy cups. They should be getting all their suckling, feeding needs from your boobs. If you're in this category of exclusively or nearly exclusively breastfeeding your child, you can use what's called the lactational amenorrhea method. So lactational breastfeeding amenorrhea, no period method. But there are rules, like I said, and I'm just going to briefly go over them. There's a really nice section in Taking Charge of Your Fertility about this method. So if you have that book, look into it. You can use this if 3 things: your period has not returned and postpartum bleeding doesn't count, you are fully or almost fully breastfeeding your child, limiting pacifiers, sippy cups, bottles, and 3, your baby is less than 6 months old. And according to Taking Charge of Your Fertility, when done correctly, lactational amenorrhea method has a less than 2% failure rate, so it's around like 98% effective. But if you don't meet those requirements, keep watching. So say you breastfeed sometimes. I'd say this is more the norm for most moms. They have to go back to work after like 2.5 months. If you're nursing less than that every 4 hours during the day, every 6 hours at night, you're gonna fall into the sometimes breastfeeding category. So if your baby has started sleeping longer stretches at night, Hallelujah. So if you're in this category, you want to follow the 2 anovulatory rules: the unchanging days rule and the patch rule. But if your cycle returns, you want to go back to using and following FAM method, the 4 FAM rules, all that stuff. If you learn that, you know what I'm talking about. Okay, back to these 2 rules. You'll need to figure out what your basic infertility pattern is. This means you want to chart your cervical fluid for at least 2 weeks to see what your basic infertility pattern is when it comes to your cervical fluid. Usually women start doing this after they finish their postpartum bleeding. If your basic infertility pattern is dry or sticky day after day, you are safe on the days that it is either dry or sticky. If you have a basic infertility pattern of creamy, egg white, wet, fertile fluid, you need to consider yourself completely, fully fertile at this time. And this was me. I've had so much more fertile quality fluid since giving birth to Theo, so I've had to play it much safer. Follow the unchanging day rule as long as you have dry, sticky fluid. But as soon as you notice a change in your basic infertility pattern in your cervical fluid, you should treat yourself fertile until the 4th day in a row of non-wet, non-fertile cervical fluid after your peak day. And your peak day is the last day of that more fertile cervical fluid. Or sensation. Don't forget about sensation. Wet fluid and bleeding must be considered fertile. So basically just play it super duper safe. All right, and then the ladies that don't breastfeed, you can expect your cycle to return fairly quickly, even as soon as like 4 to 10 weeks after giving birth. And this was the case for me, even though I was breastfeeding, I got it at 10 weeks. And I think it was because he was sleeping longer stretches at night, not consistently, but I think somewhere often enough to where it started sending those signals to my body. But he wouldn't take a pacifier, he wouldn't take a bottle at this point. So it was, I think, him sleeping longer stretches, or maybe my body was just like, let's get back to normal, lady. If you're not breastfeeding, you can expect your cycle to come back pretty quickly, but most likely you're not getting jiggy with it right after birth, so you're safe. Everything I've heard says no sex for the first 6 weeks postpartum. If you do hit that 6-week mark or cleared by your provider and feel up to it, just make sure you're using some sort of protection like a condom. All this aside, what you should look for your cycle coming back. The biggest indicator is your cervical fluid. That is what you want to keep your eye out for. You might notice longer stretches of this fertile quality fluid as your body tries to get back to ovulating. And you may notice a few what they're called false starts, where your body tries to ovulate but then doesn't have enough of whatever and can't ovulate. But basically, if you notice fertile fluid of any kind, don't have unprotected sex. And I also say keep an eye out for cervical fluid, because checking your cervical fluid throughout the day is so much easier than trying to get a consistent temperature in the morning. Anyone that's had a child, or I'm sure any of you can imagine trying to get a consistent temperature with a newborn, is just nearly impossible. I know a lot of women swear by Temp Drop. I haven't tried it, but I've heard good things about it. So if that's something you're interested in, you could look into getting one of those. Checking your fluid is so much more doable, I think, as a new mom than the one chance at getting the correct temperature in the morning. And if you miss it, you miss it sort of thing. But once your baby is sleeping consistently longer stretches at night, you can start taking your temperature. And it doesn't have to be like, say, back in the day, you used to take it at 6 a.m. on the dot every single day, and your alarm would go off and that's when you take it. But sometimes your baby wakes up at 2 a.m. Sometimes he wakes up at 4 a.m. If you get at least that 3 to 4 hours of solid consecutive sleep, take your temperature, even if it is in the middle of the night, even if it's not at the same exact time every day. That's better than nothing. My biggest issue with taking my temperature is remembering to take it in the morning. I used to have a 6 a.m. alarm set on my phone for temperature taking. That would beep. I would automatically go, need to take my temperature, grab my thermometer, take it, done. I don't set an alarm these days. I have a sweet 15.5-pound alarm that wakes me up every morning, sometime between 6 and 7:30. That's when I wake up for the day, because I'm just not at a point. I keep saying like, oh, I'd love to wake up before him. I like sleep. But what I've found is when I wake up to him like starting to fuss or cry, my immediate thought isn't like, oh, I need to take my temperature. It's like, oh, baby, oh my God, baby, is he okay? Like listening for his cries. I gotta go get him. So it's not there yet where I need to like take my temperature. So what I've done is I take my thermometer. I don't have my thermometer right now. It's over there somewhere. I take my thermometer and I always put my phone face down, because if it lights up, I don't want to wake up. And I put it on top of my phone. That way when I wake up to him fussing or crying, I always check the time first, because sometimes he wakes up randomly in the middle of the night. Sometimes it's like in the morning. So I want to check what time it is to be like, okay, it's an okay time to go to get him up. So when I go to grab my phone, I touch the thermometer and I go, oh, thermometer, take my temperature, and that's how I remember. Cervical fluid, I recommend checking it. Just get into the habit of checking it every time you go to the bathroom, before I actually go to the bathroom. Sometimes I'll write cervical fluid on my thigh, like where it'd be covered by shorts. That way people don't see it, but when I pull down my pants, I go, yeah, okay, cervical fluid, check that. But I know trying to get a temperature at first is just really, really unrealistic for most moms, so just focus on your cervical fluid, and that is the best indicator of returning fertility, because your fluid is just gonna get more fertile, and it might just be really long stretches, and it's just this really annoying, drawn out limbo of postpartum hormones and fertility and everything. But just be safe, be cautious, accept your new normal. That's all I have today about your cycle returning postpartum. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.